Very few cars are known just by their number plate, but Lady Penelope's pink limousine from the Thunderbirds is one of those. Registration number Fab One, and that's what everyone seems to call it. There were the original puppet scale versions right through to drivable full scale ones later on. So join me as we try and track the history of each of these cars. And we're going to feature a few characters you've met before in some of our previous searches, but in this one we're going to meet some new ones, including the Bee Gees. Not now, Barry, you'll get me a copyright strike. Anyway, let's see what we found out. The original Thunderbirds was an ITV TV series created by Gerry and Sylvia Anderson. It featured the adventures of the Tracy family 100 years in the future and was created using the puppet animation that Gerry and Sylvia had become well known for. Over 2 series there were 32 episodes, each one 50 minutes long, which must have taken quite a lot of time to create. Anyway, these TV series led to some films. In 1966 we had Thunderbirds Are Go, and then in 1968 we had Thunderbirds 6. Then goes quiet for quite some time before in 2004 we moved on to real actors with the movie film Thunderbirds. So let's see what we found out about the various cars. The main model car everyone remembers is the one that was filmed with the puppets of Lady Penelope and Parker inside. Now, this apparently was built from fiberglass and wood and was about 2.1 metres or 7 foot long in English money. And at the time of building back in the mid-60s, it cost £2,500 to build. And in 2025 terms, that is £41,000. Now, a lot of questions are raised over the Rolls-Royce grille and Spirit of Ecstasy. And I found a quote by a chap called Dennis Miller Williams, who was head of PR for Rolls-Royce in the 1960s, and when they were approached they really couldn't see a problem. It was aimed at kids and they thought, well, you know, maybe one day the kids will grow up and want to buy a Rolls-Royce, so what could possibly go wrong? As we find out as the story goes on, Rolls-Royce's attitude towards this car changed quite dramatically. Anyway, what happened to this car? Well, it goes quiet for an awfully long time. In 2001, Gerry Anderson did sell off quite a lot of his personal possessions from the Thunderbirds, the puppets and so on, but the car doesn't appear to have been anything of that sale. But it does appear in 2002 when it was sold at an auction held at Planet Hollywood, and it went up for sale there and sold for what I think is quite eye-watering, £80,000. Someone was obviously happy to spend that money. It reappears 2 years later in 2004, being sold by a company called Cooper Owen, who are a fully fledged auction house, and it was being listed on what was relatively new then, eBay, and it was up for sale for £100,000. Well, that was a starting bid, but didn't attract any bids at that time. It then goes quiet. I can't find any transaction history, but it has turned up in the collection of Sir Peter Jackson. Remember our Chitty Chitty Bang Bang video? Well, Sir Peter obviously has a thing for bits from old films, and obviously we know Peter as the man who created the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings films. And he's bought that car, he's had it fully restored, and he's got it in his private collection down there in New Zealand. So I guess a lot of you are here for the real size cars. So let's start off with the original one. This was built back in 1968 for the film Thunderbirds 6. The contract for this was given to a company called Toby Baxter, and they were in Bedfordshire in the UK. Now, the cost of build of this one was £11,000, and in today's money that is about £170,000. Now, it was built based on a Bedford Val chassis with a Chinese 6 layout. Yeah, I didn't know what that was either. That's the layout where you've got the 4 steering wheels at the front and single solid rear axle at the back. Now, the Bedford Val chassis you would normally find underneath buses. And yes, if you're curious, the Italian Job bus and the Magical Mystery Tour Beatles film both used buses based on that chassis. Now, interestingly, to get the scale of this model correct, they actually had to widen the axles on this, and they ended up with a vehicle that was 22 feet 6 inches long and about 8 foot wide and weighed somewhere in the region of 3 tons. I'll come back to you in a minute on the engine, because I've got a bit of a beef with a childhood hero of mine. Now, as far as I can ascertain, this was registered as CPP1F, as the FAB1 registration had already been taken. But I've done a bit of research on that, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. One of the car's first appearances was in June 1968, when it featured on children's TV favourite Blue Peter. And this is where I've got a little bit of an issue with John Noakes, one of my childhood heroes, who goes through the spec and mentions it does 150 miles an hour. John, as we'll find out later, it wouldn't do 150 miles an hour. We've dropped it out of an aeroplane, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Its big day came on the 29th of July 1968, the premiere of Thunderbird 6, and the idea was that Gerry and Sylvia Anderson would arrive at the premiere in Fab One, a bit like, you know, Lady Penelope arriving. However, it set off from their hotel and in a few hundred yards broke down, and they arrived at the premiere in a London black cab. Not really the look they were going for. And this is a point where Rolls-Royce support of the project, shall we say, took a definite change. They wanted to buy the car. Ostensibly, I believe they wanted to destroy it, but they came to a compromise where the Rolls-Royce grille was removed, a facsimile was put on, and with the letters LP for Lady Penelope. So everyone was happy, and we toddled along. Now, this car it appears on a bit of a promotional tour. There's some pictures here by a chap called John Reed of it at a dealership in Luton called Shaw and Kilburn, and you know, it looks still in pretty good condition. This is somewhere in the late 1960s. It then disappears for a little while, and then apparently turned up at a children's home called McIntyre's, again in the Bedfordshire area. And apparently it was pretty much abandoned in the shed round the back, and it believed been used for promotional purposes for the children's home to raise money. Then goes quiet again for a little bit and reappears with one of our friends from the Chitty search that we did, Heathfield Wildlife Park down in East Sussex. They acquired it in the mid-1970s. Apparently it was starting to look quite run down. However, they got it up and running for the son of the owner of Heathfield Wildlife Park. He was getting married, and they used the Fab One as their wedding car. Now, after this, the car fell into quite bad disrepair, as we can see by the photo here. You can see its original registration number, CPP1F, and it goes quiet for quite some period after this, until the late 1980s, where enter the saviour of many film cars, Peter Nelson of the Cars of the Stars Museum up in Keswick in Cumbria, and he acquired the car, having outbid Lord Montague of the National Motor Museum down at Bewley, and also the Bee Gees manager, a chap called Robert Stigwood. Now, Peter put the car in for a full restoration. He gave it to a company called Mellor Coachcraft in Rochdale, who I believe are better known for building minibuses. But they did a cracking job on the car and got it all back up and running. And Peter had it back in his museum from 1989. And it was Peter who revealed what was actually under the bonnet of this car in a 2004 interview with the Telegraph newspaper. In fact, it is a 6-cylinder Vauxhall engine, 3 litres in capacity. So 150 miles an hour is very much out of the question with the weight of this car. Then in August 1990, it took part in the Great British Film Car Rally. And this was a run from Cardiff to London and then up to Edinburgh. Unfortunately, I can't find many articles from this point. However, this was the point where Rolls-Royce entered the story again. And they approached Peter to sell the car. They'd already apparently sent him a sort of cease and desist letter saying, well, you know, it needs to have anything vaguely Rolls-Royce removed from it. But Peter had been able to show them the original letter that they'd sent to Gerry and Sylvia Anderson regarding use of the grille and the Spirit of Ecstasy and so on. Apparently the problem was Rolls-Royce hadn't limited it to model cars. They just said, yes, you can use it on Fab One. And so they sort of just carried on. Rolls-Royce really wanted to buy the car off him, but Peter was convinced that they were going to buy it to destroy it, so he sort of turned down their offer. Anyway, 1998, this car makes a TV appearance on a sitcom program called 2.4 Children, which, to be, from a personal point of view, was a great favourite of mine. I used to enjoy that one. And an episode called Perfect Day. They had actually bought this car as their allegedly practical daily driver. Not sure it would actually really fall into that category, but give it a go. And then in 2013, Peter decided to sell up his museum along with the Bond Esprit that he had and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and so on to a chap called Michael Deezer, who is based in America. He took all the cars from that museum initially to Miami, which wasn't particularly a success, but he then moved it to Orlando and has opened Dieselland Park, where the car is now still there on display. Now next up is probably the most controversial Fab One, and that is the one that was built for the 2004 movie Thunderbirds, which used live actors rather than puppets. Now this car was originally intended by the filmmakers to be a Rolls-Royce, and they approached them with the idea of the concept of the car and so on, and Rolls-Royce, now owned by BMW of course, decided no, it's not for us at the moment. Apparently they were interested if Lady Penelope would use a standard Rolls-Royce. Well, that wasn't really going to happen, was it? So this is where the filmmakers turned to Ford, and they ended up branding the car. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory in this. As I did the research, there was lots of different stories about how this car was designed and by who, and I think I've put that one to bed. I found a post by a chap called David Beasley, and he explained that he was at the London College of Automotive Art back in the early 2000s. And they had approached by the film design department for volunteers, for people who'd like to come along and get involved in a project. Didn't know what it was at the time. Went down to Pinewood and was told all about this new film and the new concept for Fab One. So he got his sort of pen and pencils out and came up with a design. And you think, well, how do we prove this? Well, two ways. One, David has actually posted his original design drawings, and you see at this time it was still actually as a Rolls-Royce, which was the original concept. But apart from that, you can see it looks very similar to the finished car. It's still got that Chinese six-wheel layout. And the other thing is, at the end of the film, you can see David in the credits. So hopefully that puts that little bit of query to bed. Now this car was a bit bigger than the original. It was 27 foot long rather than 22.5. Again, it was about 3.5 tons in weight. Had 22-inch rims, which is obviously a lot bigger than those original wheels on the first Fab One. And it did its promotional tour, shall we say, similar to when the original went to Blue Peter. This one went to Top Gear and was driven around little country villages by James May. And obviously it wasn't really practical for that kind of driving, and apparently it also understeered like a super tanker. Now once its promotional tour had come to an end, it ended up in the British Motor Museum at Gaydon, which is where it is still on display now. Now the interesting thing about this car is it was properly road registered. We can see here it went on the road in January 2004, registered as LP03 FAB. But looking on My Car Check, there's quite a surprise that we discover it was actually written off on the 6th of February 2009. And it's basically been put down as scrapped, even though we know where it is because it's in the museum. But it is no longer road legal, which I thought was a bit of an odd move, but presumably by Ford. But hey, that's what they've decided to do. Just before the last car, a quick diversion onto that Fab One number plate. Now, this plate was originally released in the late 1940s and in 2012 came into the hands of DJ Chris Evans when he purchased it for the grand sum of £75,000. The next year it was temporarily assigned to a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost that was in pink, obviously a little bit of Lady Penelope going on there, but it was in aid of a great cause. It was the breast cancer awareness campaign. And then after that, I understand Chris has sold that plate. I can't find any records of it changing hands through an auction or anything similar. But at the moment, as we check on DVLA and on My Car Check, we can see it's not assigned to a vehicle at the moment. So I can only guess it's on a retention certificate. Now, the next Fab One is one that you may well not be aware of. Now, this car was built around about the same time as the Thunderbirds movie. But by a chap called Melvin Jarvis from Leicestershire in the UK. Now, he was a big Thunderbirds fan and decided the best way to get a Fab One was to build his own. Now, this one was featured in November 2004 on the BBC News website when he was getting close to completion of his build. And this one is a slightly different design. In the basis, it's actually got 4 doors. Now, looking at the registration on this car, it's actually down as a 1970 Jaguar 420G. Now, there could well be 420G bits in there, but I spent a lot of time looking at the centre part of this car, trying to work out where the doors were from. And as far as I can work out, they are Jaguar XJ X300 centre sort of part of that car. And I believe the engine also comes from that same car. And Melvin went on to offer this car as an sort of alternative limousine through his fab1hire.co.uk website. And I thought it's a great idea, actually. It was either this or, you know, some American saloon car with 28 foot welded into the middle. And to be honest, I'd rather have this. And also, it was invited with Melvin to be at Gerry Anderson's funeral back in 2013. But unfortunately, this car currently is not very fab. In 2021, it suffered an arson attack and was almost completely burnt out. But Melvin clearly is not somebody who's easily knocked back, because he's vowed to rebuild it better than it was before. And as we can see by the footage on his own YouTube channel, he's already started stripping it back, ready to rebuild. And on another website, I've actually seen a picture of it where it's been sandblasted all the body to clean it up, ready to get going again. So hopefully that one will reappear in the not too distant future. I hope you've enjoyed that little trip through the history of Fab One. There was some quite interesting twists and turns in there, I thought. And if you have enjoyed it, please do consider giving that subscribe button a click for us. And I'll catch you next time.